Okay, so yesterday our lesson was adding and subtracting fractions with the same denominators. Now we'll be adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators. Okay, so this is the one thing that you need to remember when you do adding and subtracting fractions. Their denominators have to be the same. Okay, so for example, this one, 2/4 plus 1/5. What do we do when we add fractions? We always check the denominators first, and then we find out the denominators are not the same in here. So therefore, what should we do? We need to convert the both fractions, which is 2/4 and 1/5, into their respective equivalent fractions, such that their denominators are the same. I guess that's kind of long to say. Basically, you need to change 2/4 and 1/5 into their equivalent fractions. But make sure that their equivalent fractions have the same denominator. That's what we will do today. Alright. Okay. So I put this reminder in here so you always keep yourself kept reminded that when we add and subtract fractions, we have to make sure the denominators are the same. Okay, so let's try this. 2/4 plus 1/5. Okay, we need to change them into their equivalent fractions so that we can equivalent fractions with the same denominator. Alright, how do we get the equivalent fractions? If you have forgotten that, you may need to go back to the previous video about how to get equivalent fractions. Okay, so between 4, let's check the denominators. The denominators of these numbers, of these fractions, are 4 and 5. So we need to get the least common multiple. Okay, which is 20. The least common multiple is a number that you can both divide by 4 and 5. The smallest number that you can both divide by 4 and 5. Okay? Alright, so for 2/4, what is the equivalent fraction such that the denominator is 20? Okay, so what did you do to 4, the denominator, to make it 20? You multiply that one with 5, right? Okay, so that became 20, and of course you also have to multiply 2 by 5 to make it 10. So therefore 2/4 is equal to 10 over 20. Okay, 2/4 has an equivalent fraction 10 over 20. Alright, what about 1/5? You want to get an equivalent fraction of 1/5 such that the denominator is 20. Okay, so you multiplied 5 with 4, and you also have to multiply 1 with 4. So therefore, you have 1 times 4, that is 4. So now you have your equivalent fractions, 10 over 20 plus 4 over 20. Again, we're adding, and we check the denominators. Okay, they are the same. They're both 20, so therefore we can just add the numerators. So that's 20. That's 14 over 20. 10 plus 4. Let's try this one. If you're having a hard time getting the common denominator, please review the video on equivalent fractions and also the common denominator, or the comparing fractions. I have a discussion there about how to get a common denominator. Okay, so 2/3 plus 1/5. What is the least common multiple or least common denominator? That is 15. Okay, so let's convert 2/3 into a fraction where the denominator is 15. Alright, so basically we multiplied 2/3 by 5 over 5. So 2 times 5, that is equal to 10, and 3 times 5, that's equal to 15. Alright, so you have your equivalent fraction there. And let's try to do 1/5. To make that 5/15, you have to multiply that by 3. And so therefore you also have to multiply 1 by 3. So you have 3 over 15. And now we can add these new fractions now. 10 over 15 plus 3 over 15 since their denominators are the same, so you just have to add the numerators. So you have 13 over 15. Okay, let's try another one. 5 over 7 plus 1/4. Okay, what is the common denominator, or the smallest or the least common denominator? Okay, so that will be 28. Basically, just multiplied 7 and 4. That's one shortcut too. But when you multiply 7 and 4, or for this problem, this works, but sometimes it does not really necessarily mean it's the least common denominator for some numbers. Alright, so let's try to get the equivalent fractions of these two fractions. So what did you multiply to 7 to make it 28? Okay, so we multiplied 4, so therefore we multiply 4 to both numerator and denominator, so we have 20 over 28. That is your equivalent fraction for 5/7. And for 1/4, you multiplied 7 to both numerator and denominator, and you would have 7 over 28. So now therefore you can add these two fractions because they have the same denominator, and so that is 27 over 28. Alright, how about let's try to do subtraction. Okay. Alright, so 2/3, let's ignore the times 3. I may have just forgotten to put an animation for that. Alright, so 2/3 minus 1/4. The common denominator is 12. Okay. So let's convert, or yeah, let's convert 2/3 into a different fraction. I mean, an equivalent fraction with 12 as a denominator. So you multiply that by 4. 4 for the denominator and 4 for the numerator. So you have 8 over 12. And for 1/4, you multiply by 3. Okay. So you have 3 over 12. So now you can subtract because you have the same denominator. So now 8 minus 3 is 5, so that's 5 over 12. Alright, so let's try this one. Okay, so what is the common denominator, or the least common denominator between 5 and 10? Meaning a number that you can both divide by 5 and 10. So that will be 10. Okay, so let's get the equivalent fraction of 2/5. So what did you multiply to 5 to make it 10? You just multiplied it by 2. So you also multiply the numerator. So that becomes 4 over 10. And 1/10, basically you multiplied it with 1. Okay, so that becomes 1/10 also. So now since you have the same denominator, you can subtract the numerators. And that would be 3 over 10. Okay. Right, so let's practice some more on finding out least common denominators and equivalent fractions, because that will be a skill that you will need in comparing fractions, adding fractions, and subtracting fractions. Alright, good luck.